Shazam.
There you go.
All right. Now we're going to transition into talking about some more specific kinds of insects. We're going to talk about insect pollinator conservation. I'm going to talk about everything sort of generally that's happening with pollinators and how to use insecticides around them. Natalia is going to finish up the evening by talking about pollinator insect conservation and some really cool activities that you can partake in that she's in charge of that are just really awesome. It's really fun, and you're going to help pollinators out if you take part in them, right, Natalia?
Yes, that's exactly what I was
And we've got some stuff to cover before we get to that part, though. So you have to listen to me a little bit longer. If you've heard about pollinators recently, you've probably heard that most people have talked about pollinator decline. We're seeing a reduction in sheer numbers of bees. We've seen a decline in their population totals, and we've lost some biodiversity as well. We're seeing local extinctions of some bees. An example would be the state of Illinois has demonstrated they used to have 25 species of bumblebee. Now they're down to 20. So we're seeing these small local changes in pollinator populations. This has been a startling issue for a lot of people. A lot of folks are really concerned about this, and they want to know what's going on because we've always been taught about how important pollinators are to agriculture and to food production and just the beauty of the world. So it's caused a lot of people to point fingers in different directions and want to know what's happening. And I always preface this discussion by saying this is an onion issue. It has a lot of layers, and it makes you want to cry. There's just a lot to unpack with pollinator decline, and I'm going to go through some of those different layers here before we get into the discussion of how to help them. So the first thing, and sometimes the toughest thing for us to confront that impacts pollinator populations, is habitat loss due to increased urbanization. We continually remove green spaces like parks or meadows or just even golf courses or places like that and turn them into parking lots and shopping centers and McDonald's and houses. And this reduces food resources for pollinators. It reduces nesting sites for them. It drives them to forage over greater distances, so they get hit by cars or eaten by birds. And it's just very stressful for them to confront our urban sprawl. And this is something that not a lot of people like to think about because it means changing the way that we interact with the world. So this is one of the tougher ends of the spectrum of pollinator decline to deal with. But Natalia is going to teach you how you can, at your own home, help to combat habitat loss. If we focus specifically on social bees like honeybees and bumblebees, there are diseases that they are impacted by as well. If any of you are a beekeeper or if you learn about beekeeping in the future, you may hear about a disease called Nosema apis. It's on the right there. This is a dysentery-like disease. It makes the bees defecate all over the outside of their hive. It's pretty gross. And this is a disease that can stress hives out. It's been around for a long time. But there are newer diseases too, like Israeli acute paralysis virus. I bet you can never guess where it came from or what it does to pollinators based on the name. This is a disease that we think is linked to colony collapse disorder. So it impacts honeybees. Colony collapse disorder is a term that gets thrown around a lot. That is a phenomenon that only affects honeybee hives. So it's not pollinator decline. Pollinator decline includes colony collapse disorder, but it's not only about honeybees and colony collapse. But this disease, according to some researchers, may be a part of that disappearing honeybee hive phenomenon. The other part of colony collapse disorder, a lot of folks believe, is linked to parasitic mites that attack honeybee hives. Some of the older mites that we've dealt with were called tracheal mites. These are small arachnids that get inside of the breathing tubes of a honeybee, and they clog her breathing apparatus up, basically give her bronchitis or asthma. She doesn't breathe and respirate as well, and she can become very stressed out by that. We have, for the most part, beaten the tracheal mites. Some research done actually here in the state of Nebraska helped to defeat that pest, but there's a new mite that's in town that causes a lot of issues called the varroa mite. Its scientific name is Varroa destructor, which I think sounds a lot like a supervillain. And it's a mite that is a blood-feeding mite. It gets on the outside of adult bees and larval bees, and it drinks their blood. So they attach themselves. It's like a tick. Imagine you had a tick on you the size of a house cat, and you start to understand what a bee goes through when they get one of these mites on them. So these mites can transmit diseases. They are stressful to the honeybee. It's just not a good thing to have in the colony. So those things combined are stressful. We've seen some human effects on pollinators. Chief among them sometimes are beekeeping practices, which can stress bees out and lead to colony loss. Beekeepers are used to colony loss. Sometimes every winter you lose about 30% of your bees. Depends on the honey stores. Sometimes beekeepers have to take more honey from the hive to fill an order, big commercial beekeeping situations. And that stuff, that honey that the bees are going to eat, gets replaced with different objects like high fructose corn syrup or sugar water. And that's not as nutritious for the bees, so it can weaken their immune system, open them up to those diseases we discussed and mites. It's also a stressful scenario when bees are moved around the country. This semi-truck that you see on the right here is a flatbed trailer that's transporting colonies of honeybees from site to site. This is the quickest way to get through a truck weighing station if you're a semi-driver, is to have a truck full of bees in the back. But they truck these around. There are certain routes that the honeybees go on. So a honeybee could begin the growing season in Iowa at an alfalfa farm, and then later in the season be moved to an avocado plantation in California. It could go up to an apple orchard in Washington a month later, and then end up the year in a sunflower farm in North Dakota. So this travel is stressful. They're put in communal situations where they swap diseases and parasites. I have a young daughter, and we just started sending her to daycare, and she's come back with multiple colds and fevers and stuff. It's sort of the same idea. There's lots of things living together in a small area, and they're swapping diseases frequently. So this has led to some colony loss as well. But if you've heard about anything in pollinator decline, I'm guessing it's about insecticides and pollinators, particularly the neonicotinoids. So these are insecticides that we use to control many different kinds of pests. Insecticides are meant to kill insects, so it stands to reason that they can kill pollinating insects like bees. The neonicotinoids are the most widely used class of products in the world. There's 3 examples here on the screen. We've got Arena, Merit, and Safari, or clothianidin, imidacloprid, and dinotefuran if you're using the chemical names. These products are used in corn, they're used in soybeans, used in turf, used in tree protection, shrub protection, gardens, all over the place. These are a popular product because they work against a lot of insects. They also are relatively safe when you compare them to older chemistries like 7 or even the pyrethroids in some cases, and especially organophosphates and organochlorines. These products were sort of hailed as revolutionary in the 90s when they came out. More and more data is suggesting that they do have the possibility of impacting pollinating insects, though. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. The truth of the matter is that we're talking about a perfect storm. This is a bunch of things happening all at once that are combining to harm pollinator populations, to sink the good ship pollinator here in my analogy. So it's difficult to accept because we want to point to one of these things and say, if we get rid of this, if we change this, if we do that, we'll save the pollinators. But the data doesn't bear that out. Historical evidence across the world doesn't bear that out. We need to confront this holistically and address each of these things separately and collectively so that we can help pollinators. Sometimes that's not something that we as general citizens can do. There's not a lot you can do as a non-beekeeper and non-farmer necessarily about diseases and insecticide use on a corn farm. But you can change the way that you use insecticide products. You can help stop habitat loss. You can help join the team that helps pollinating insects. So we have a couple of simple things to talk about around how to do that.